If we can take seats, please. Okay. Well, okay, so none of you want to?
Well, I mean, we could be flexible.
Okay.
I can.
It's just
Sure,
equal branches.
Oh. Sure, we can speak, huh, John?
Sure. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on AO 2019-136, establishing the construction and maintenance of life safety access roads. Let's start with introductions.
Forrest Dunbar.
Felix Rivera.
Pete Peterson.
Susanna France.
John Weddleton.
Bill Falsey, the Anchorage Municipal Manager.
Becky Wynn Pearson, Municipal Attorney.
Thank you. So before I turn it over to Mr. Falsey really quick, I just want to invite Ms. LaFrance, Mr. Weddleton, or I guess Ms. Kennedy's not here, to just provide a quick frame, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Falsey for the presentation.
Sure.
The problem that this addresses is not new in any way, shape, or form, and it's been critical for a long time, and we've just been very, very lucky. I drove this summer through Paradise, where they had that horrible fire and people died in the last year, and that could happen in Anchorage, and we were so vulnerable, and we simply have no way for people to escape. People would be trapped in places on the hillside, and how do we fix that? And there's no really clear way forward. I've been aware of it since the time we did the Hillside District Plan, actually since John C. and other team were rallying the troops about fire-wise issues and so on. And then Hillside District Plan has been a major issue, and we were not clever enough to come up with any kind of way to really get the funding to make these road connections beyond state grants, which don't happen anymore. Then comes Mr. Falsey, who's very clever, and came up with this. So, I'm not sure what's something to say. Pass it on.
Thanks, Don. I think that was really well put, as always. But it comes down to having one way in and one way out in a lot of places on the hillside, in Chiviak-Eagle River, in Girdwood, and even in areas of Ardza. And that this would be a mechanism for building and maintaining roads that are needed simply to provide life safety and access.
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This has been, they've been talking about this for over 20 years. I mean, when I was having a piece of business in South Anchorage, they were talking about trying to, have more than one way in and out of the hillside. It made perfect sense then, and it's still there.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Falsey.
Okay, well, it sounds like this may be a soft pitch to hit, but I'm just going to provide an illustrated version of what Assembly Members Weddleton, LaFrance, and Peterson have already said. So that's right. With the chair's introduction, we're talking about AO 2019-136, which would establish construction and maintenance of life safety access roads as a power we are now going to exercise on an area-wide basis. To refer to the very beginning, the Anchorage Charter since 1975 has said that we, the municipality, you, the Assembly, can exercise all legislative powers that are not prohibited to you by state or federal law or by the Charter itself. This is not one of those things. As a matter of practice, we have imperfectly, but in recent years started again, keeping track of where we have actually declared what area-wide powers we're going to be exercising. The most recent example, which a lot of the Assembly members currently serving on the body will remember, is that we added highway law enforcement. We had been previously exercising police powers only through some service areas, and partly we were doing highway law enforcement in service areas, partly we had no highway law enforcement, and we said we had grown up to the point where we now need to do that area-wide. We had learned by going back through the history from the example of the library. In 1978, we used to have a library service area, and we said that's silly, we should just do that area-wide. Later in 1981, I believe it was, we previously had a sewerage service area, we said that's silly, we don't need to be doing that area-wide. So having minded our P's with highway law enforcement, this proposal is legally pretty simple. We will now mind our Q's. Is solely to add the construction and maintenance of life safety access roads is now also the power we are choosing to exercise on an area-wide basis. And why do we need to do that? you might think we don't, because we have already adopted the International Fire Code, where we say if you're doing a development and you're going to bring 30 units of residential housing somewhere, you got to have 2 ways in and out that are adequate for a fire apparatus to get to you. So we've already declared that as a policy goal and a requirement for anybody new. But as it turns out, we didn't always have that rule in the municipality, and so there's this big legacy problem. And so I'll tell my version of the story, which will soon reveal itself to be a Groundhog's Day, where we keep reinventing this story over and over. In 2016, we had the McHugh fire, which folks will remember was a pretty substantial fire that shut down the Seward Highway for at least a day, I think it was. And in some ways, it was another wake-up call, another iteration of the same story. We had pretty favorable winds, but if the winds had blown in the other direction, the nightmare scenario that Assemblymember Weddleton was speaking of really well could come to pass, where if we started to burn out Potter Valley or Bear Valley or Golden View area, there's one way in and one way out in a lot of those places. And it was yet another wake-up call. And at the time, then firefighter Joe Albrecht, Captain Joe Albrecht, who I will say I've just met, who's live here in the flesh, happily retired. Now we're all working for him, to mention. Went out of his way while working at Fire Station 10 without really being directed to do this, to say, we just dodged this bullet. We had this serious wildfire that just happened, and it's not the first time it just happened. And if the winds had been different, it could have been paradise. It would have been really not a good thing. And so he had his crew go out and survey all of his jurisdiction and suggest a bunch of missing connections that really should be patched up in order for us to get out of this. There are several subdivisions in that area that would be very problematic to respond to in a major wildfire incident. And if we ever had non-wildfire reasons to evacuate, there's a lot of one-way ins and one-way outs, and so that too becomes a problem. As it turns out, this was Groundhog's Day. As John mentioned, we have rediscovered this problem and identified this problem every several years. So in 2007, when we were doing the Hillside District Plan, there was a road connectivity white paper, which we've included in the assembly documents, that said we have these large areas of the hillside that have single ways in and out, and they're basically long cul-de-sacs, and that means there's serious problems if you have emergency access. If that one thing gets blocked, you won't be able to get in, you won't be able to get out. We have been discovering this in all areas of town, so we just found this one. We were late to the game because I didn't know it existed, and Chris Schutte found it. We added this to the addenda, so it will show up in your assembly packets on Tuesday. Eagle River, Chugiak Eagle River had the same thought in 2005, and so there was a steering committee back then that was formed to look at all the missing connections in Chugiak Eagle River. That even got funded through the AMAPS process and what they called Task 270, and it resulted in a map that I think only exists on hard copy on a wall somewhere with all of these numbers on it, and a whole bunch of spreadsheets, and then it just stopped. And why did it stop? It stopped for the same reason I think we keep identifying this problem and not solving it, which is on the current state of play, we have a couple problems. There are areas of the municipality, such as those that are depicted in white, where we are not exercising road powers at all. So there is no power to exercise and no money to be had. And then there are areas of the municipality, like those that are depicted in the mustard colored and in pink, and in Chugiak Eagle River itself, where we have road service areas, but practically there is no way that they're ever going to be able to raise the kind of funds you would need to build some of these missing connections. And so when we identified this problem in the past, we said, this is a problem, we don't have an answer, we're going to solve this, I guess, by hoping that state grants keep coming through. And that was a serviceable enough approach in good times. This is also in your budget as one of the, I think it's in Appendix D or so. But there's a history of all the awards we've been getting at the municipality from the state. And if you look at the project management and engineering column, in the main, that is road grants that we get from the state. And before we were here, we were getting tens of millions of dollars a year. In the previous 6 years before we were here, it was more than $30 million every year, and sometimes as much as $106 million. That is not the case anymore. In the whole time that we have been around, since 2015, we've actually received $0 for road projects. There's 484 shown there in 2019. That is a particularly strange grant where we have been given money to operate streetlights on a DOT road because DOT did not want to install and operate the streetlights. So what do? We rediscovered the problem again in 2019 when we had the MLK fire, and we actually did order an evacuation. Happily, this was in an area of town where there are lots of ways in and out. And then we had the big earthquake on November 30th, which also reminded us that there are these choke points, and if certain roads had failed, folks would have been stuck. Meanwhile, it turns out great minds think alike, and just as Eagle River came up with this in 2005, and Hillside came up with it in 2007, and the fire department came up with it in 2006, Girdwood, through its Girdwood Alliance nonprofit, we discovered, well after we even had this working draft, was similarly looking at this problem and said, hey, we just had this big earthquake. We all live on one road that has a bridge, and if that bridge goes out, everybody who's staying at the Alyeska Hotel is stuck. So they have been working on an effort where they say, here's where we all live, there's only one way going out. We've been talking about maybe building this road, which is probably a $60 million road, or maybe there's a new way, we've come around on the top. But there too, they're never, by the Girdwood Valley service area, going to be able to construct any of those roads. Those roads may not even fit entirely within their service area, and there's just not enough taxing capacity to build a road like that. So what does this proposal do to hopefully sort of break us out of the Groundhog Day loop? I think it does two things in the main, and they're both related to funding. One is just to say, we could get in this business and start chipping away at it together as a big group, rather than as tiny little road service islands. Meaning that if we declared the construction and maintenance of life safety access roads as an area-wide power, we would allow ourselves to go to voters not with an Anchorage roads and drainage service area bond, but with a new flavor of bond that doesn't exist. We would go to them and say something like, here, just a sort of mock up, the bond council really have to write it. Area-wide life safety access roads, may we, for the purpose of providing these roads, borrow money, and everybody's going to pay for it together. So if you're starting, pick your favorite places, you could pick a project on the hillside, you could pick a project in Eagle River, you could pick a project in Girdwood, and we would all together start to chip away at this issue. That's the main way we do it. We're sort of stronger together and can finally get off the dime. The other is, there exists a bunch of federal money to do road projects. And that is programmed through AMATS, the Anchorage Metropolitan Area Transit Solutions Committee, and through the Transportation Improvement Program. It doesn't reach every part of the municipality, but it reaches most of the municipality. So those projects are in the main funded by federal dollars, which require a local match. Meaning that if there is a $15 million road connection to be built in Eagle River or somewhere in Anchorage, if we could now exercise this power on an area-wide basis, we could ask voters not even to shoulder 100% of the cost of that project, but something maybe like 10% of that. Can we raise a local match to match a federal project? We've described that in some particularity in the documents that we've submitted for the Assembly to consider, because we even have a great example. This area of the hillside has been long understood to be particularly vulnerable. Everybody's going out on Golden View on one area, Bear Valley is stuck on Clark's Road. It seems like if you could make a connection in the middle, that would start to really de-risk those areas. And there is a proposed connection that's been talked about for a very long time called Mountain Air Drive. There's even a pretty substantial effort to get it designed and get it constructed. And there's money sitting now in the AMATS TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, but we have no way, and it's been sitting there, but we don't have any way of getting that money because we have no local dollars that we can put to it. So you could imagine that one of the first things that we might do is ask voters that in addition to some other area-wide geographically dispersed projects, can we borrow the money just to make the local match to get this project off the ground? And then that could be a new part of the conversation in AMATS, that there have been projects that are needed projects that we've included, but practically we have no way of ever actually paying for. And this could be a new flavor of surfacing in that process. We really should be knocking out some of these needed connections to de-risk some of our areas. So the hard question about this, I think, is what do you ask voters to potentially let you borrow money to go build? But I think in some ways the proposal in front of you now is the easy part, because the question today under this ordinance is just, should we be in this business? I think the answer is unequivocally yes, because if we are not in this business, we are only ever at the mercy of the state just gifting us more money. I don't know when that occurs again, and otherwise sort of powerless, and we will forget about it and reinvent it in another 5 years, and then forget about it and reinvent it in another 10 years. So we're bringing that to you for action on Tuesday. If we are going to get in this business, that'll then set up the more interesting conversation about where do we start.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the last two comments you made about this does not commit specific projects and there's federal funding available, I think partially alleviate my concern, but I still want to play devil's advocate a little bit. I was a wildland firefighter for a little while, and in California there are laws preventing you from constructing homes at the top of certain box canyons because they're so dangerous you can't get a fire crew in there. So people aren't allowed to build there. And there's also talk about the hurricane coast in North Carolina and Florida. The only reason people still build there is because they can get certain kinds of federal flood insurance. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. And so, what you're asking my voters in East Anchorage, who are predominantly renters and much lower income, is to pay for a kind of road that would only be, it happens to be, in the wealthiest parts of our town, for people that built, not all mansions, but like big houses up on the hillside. I know that's a generalization. I know that there are more modest income places. But, when I'm talking to Russian Jack Community Council, what am I going to tell them? I say, yeah, we need this power so that we can de-risk these homes that probably should have been built because they're way too far up and they didn't, and their road service areas, which are supposed to handle this kind of thing, don't have enough money to make this a safe place to live. So what do I say to my constituents?
There's, I think, several ways you can respond to that. One is just to say, this doesn't obligate anybody that you are going to pay for anything. This allows us to send the question to voters so that they can decide for themselves whether these are problems that we're worth fixing as a community. The second is, I don't know if there are missing connections specifically in the part of ARTSA that your folks live in. We can certainly find that out. There are missing connections in even the biggest Anchorage road drainage service area. There's only one way in and out of Stuckey Heights, for instance.
Stuckey Heights, is Stuckey Heights in the ARTSA? It's not in the ARTSA. That's why we've had problems with that road.
And maybe that's, yes, maybe that's that's right. So that's not in ARTSA. That's right. I'm going to say here now.
And it's also
but your constituents, I'm sure, are also travelers from time to time. So, for the extent that they are up at Alyeska Mountain or taking a hike at Peters Creek, there are times where they too will benefit from these connections potentially existing. I mean, hopefully, no one will ever have to have that come to pass. But yes, there would be times where they too could particularly benefit from that. And I don't know if there's anything else. I should have invited the whole of the Peanut Gallery to introduce themselves as well, but I'll say I'll phone a friend if anyone wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, Brian Dean, Fire Marshal, Anchorage Fire Department. We've looked throughout the municipality at different road connections or needed road connections, and even we're talking about very large road connections in this context here, but the senior captains of various stations around town did windshield surveys of various locations within Anchorage, all the way from talk about Government Hill access up there, even Centennial Circle back in behind Muldoon, just smaller connections that are just one way in, really, and one way out. So it's not just limited to the hillside area. We have opportunities all over the place, both big projects and small projects.
But couldn't we already bond for those? I mean, we already have the ability to bond in ARTSA for road projects.
If they are in ARTSA, yes, we already have the ability to bond for them, and ARTSA does have most of the taxable value, but not as much as this proposal, because it does include any of Chudiaki River, Birchwood, or Girdwood. But yes,
Yes, so the flip is that those projects within ARTSA would now, the burden of them would be borne by the municipality as a whole. So the voters outside of ARTSA would also, if we designated something as a secondary life safety access road project, it could go on the bond, which would be borne. So it's sort of a smoothing of that task across every neighborhood of the municipality. It would be things within ARTSA that fall in this category. Probably less their projects there, but there are some, and then projects outside. I'd say a couple other things too. I mean, I think that not at the risk of making a trickle-down economics type argument, I think the challenge is, we live in a geographically limited space, so we will move where the only place we have kind of left to do is to move up and out in our further outlying neighborhoods. And as we build more housing there, more housing in theory frees up elsewhere in the community. And we do have some places in these areas where we run into continuous legal battles with where people actually own the properties, and now there's one person who owns one lot, and we're telling them you can't build a home because somebody else before you built 30 lots, and we are perennially at the risk of a large-scale takings litigation with the folks who already own lots we allowed them to subdivide in the past, and they have no way to safely build now because we enforce this rule more rigorously. So in to some respect, it takes away. I think at some point we will hit the point where we will either have to buy those lots from people because it will be a taking, or we end up solving part of that problem if we start building more connectors in our further outlying areas. So aside from the life safety, the very real risk we have of we have people living in these houses right now, and we don't want to tell them, like, sorry, you're stuck there if there's a fire or natural disaster. We also have some flip side risk. It's not a $0 proposition, and to the extent it's a legal loss, it's borne by the whole municipality anyway. So it's something that taxpayers across the area-wide dollars would pay for that if we ever ended up settling with any of these landowners. So
one of the things you just said is, if we build this, it'll open up more lots for construction. So ironically, we'd be incentivizing people to build in the high fire danger area by sort of opening it up using these roads.
I think that's not the issue. Is not necessarily incentivizing building in a high fire danger area as much as it is making it less of a high fire danger area to live there. In terms of, I mean, the MLK fire was smacking the town.
Sure.
Is that, would you consider? I mean, I think a lot of Anchorage, as we've talked about when we talked about the homeless camp issue, right? Every park that we have in the right conditions is a high fire danger area, and we live in a city that has parks that run straight through the middle of town past our most populated residential areas. So I think that it's not so much that framework as it is we're making it safer to live in places across the community where right now there high danger areas because there's only one way in now.
Thank you. Ms. Oliver.
Thank you. I have two questions. Is there and I'm sorry, I was a little bit late. Is there a definition of life safety access road in the code specifically?
Yeah, through the chair, there is not, and that in some ways tracks the way we have done all of the other area-wide power assumptions, where we didn't have a specific definition of a log, highway log, for instance. So I think that would be up to the Assembly to actualize that in all the bond proposals that might go to voters. I don't know that you need a firmer definition, and I know that we chatted about this with Dean Gates over email. To the extent that you really desired one, I suppose you could say something like the first and second road that meets the fire apparatus standards in the fire code would be the life safety access road. But the only reason to have a definition that constrained you would be to police the kinds of things that you could put on the bond, but you guys police that by deciding the bond every year anyway.
Potentially. I mean, the body changes over time, administrations change, and I am sympathetic to what Mr. Dunbar said, that I wouldn't want this utilized in any way that just opened up for development. The other question I have is actually related to development. Why did development continue to go forward for the last 12 to 14 years if we knew this was a problem? I mean, this seems like something we have simply made worse after we identified the problem. Why didn't we just put the brakes on and do something else? Because I think to go in and add this to the bond and to talk to my constituents about it, to some extent, will be why did we keep building? Why did we make it worse? Why did we up the stakes? So I would love to know more about that.
Yeah, and that one I might solicit the assistance of Ken Colhates and others, but I would start by saying a lot of this happened a long time ago. So, I mean, the Canyon Road was built by a dozer and not by any kind of a legal process. So the majority of this is a vestigial problem that we are cleaning up now. Second, why did we let it go on? There are probably some times where folks really had some kind of entitlement where we couldn't really say no, or there was the first lot that was being developed. But third, there are a lot of places where we did say no, and things have been stuck for a long time. So I don't.
Through the chair, Kent Colhays, Director of PM&E, I worked in private development, MOA private development for a while. I started in 2013, so I can't speak to the last 12 years, but for the last 6 years, I would say that we did say no several times to developers large and small on areas of the hillside. We were, I'm sure they were aware before I started, but we were aware of the limitations of code, and we generally held developers those limits, much to their discontent.
Thank you. Mr. Days.
Yeah, thank you. By and large, Meg, the reason it wasn't done, the people either didn't have the political will and so on. And amongst the many things I admire about this administration is taking on these big public policy issues that are not popular and trying to get us to do the right thing. And I commend them for that. I have a very rich vocabulary to describe bad actions, but I can't go any better than say I really admire you guys for taking this on. We got tough decisions. Here we need more developable land. We need affordable housing and so on and so forth. And I am not at all interested in restricting where people can build. We can't legislate against stupid. But I want people to know if they're in a bad fire area, an avalanche chute, floodplain, bad water, or for getting water, or bad soils for having on-site sewage. People need to know that. And so people want to build where there's no fire service and so on. They're going to see it in their insurance rates. I want them to know about it, but I don't want us to tell them you can't build on private land in general unless there's an overwhelming case for it. We have already said to developers, you got to have 2 roads in and out. And we want the same thing where there's going to be a school. We don't want people to be there isolated. Those are in our existing code, I believe. Is that right?
I apologize, we've just
Yeah,
kind of
but
a
should
second.
I'm
do
sorry.
we require new subdivisions and schools to have 2 roads in and out?
So through the chair, that's part of what this ordinance is about, is that requirement for subdivisions, particularly in the rural areas, to have 2 ways in and out. I can't speak to ASD and schools, but typically can't think of one.
I think there is something there, but there should be. And Mr. Judy and I have been having a conversation about putting more stuff onto the deeds, so when you're buying a piece of land, all these things that people are not used to looking at. One other thing, here I'm channeling John Rhoda, but we have a huge issue with trailheads, and if we do these road things, I would ask the administration to think about which of them can serve as a parking area, trailheads, and so on and so forth. And every time you open a road, you're going to have illegal use of it. You're going to have some people with 4-wheelers, snow machines, or whatever, but all those issues are completely overshadowed by the public safety issue, and I commend the administration. And we probably won't run into it much, but on a larger issue, you run into the deals on roadless areas, wilderness areas that are declared roadless, and so on and so forth. And you'll have some significantly irrational and passionate people saying, don't build a road anywhere like that. I doubt if we'll run into that issue very much here. Once again, I commend these guys for doing this, and I'm enthusiastic about encouraging you guys to vote for it.
Thank you. Yeah, sure, on this.
Yeah, just responding to what Fred said, I totally agree that you should be aware when you're building in a high fire area, and that should be reflected in your insurance rate. But what we're talking about is subsidizing. And again, I'm not necessarily opposed to this, but we're talking about the rest of Anchorage, including East Anchorage and downtown and Fairview, subsidizing predominantly wealthier homeowners to go build on the Upper Hillside. And that,
It'll go down hard. We ought to.
maybe not. I mean, maybe not. And
But
maybe if there are when we finally get to the point, there are ARSA projects, we should maybe match them up and do one to one.
And it's reasonable to have those special road services pay a portion and the maintenance thereof. And my guess is our road board would probably agree to that after. Kennedy uses their charm.
That's an interesting.
Legendary.
That's an interesting question. Are the road service areas responsible for maintenance of these roads?
No, so the way this proposal would work is that we would assume that area wide, because there's no other real way to do that. I guess you could really wire it in such a way where you say, may we borrow this amount of money, and that'd be a complicated bond proposition, because you have to have the service area separately vote
Well-
take that on, I would just, well,
I mean,
let
that
me
becomes
think about
super
that.
logical.
Let me
We'll have plows, they'll lift their plow up, they'll drive all the way up to the hillside, plow this one road, and then come back down.
I mean, that
Contract
practically
with them,
wouldn't
yeah.
happen, we would just contract with whoever's plowing up there anyway.
Okay. But
We would have
it's not like
area-wide
it,
dollars
but-
to pay them to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Boy, a few comments if I could. One, just backing up on that one, is my assumption is that for many of these, the road service area would plow them. We're looking at Mountain Air right now. You have to have some responsible party, at least for a state grant, to maintain it, and they're very natural. And I'd say at the least then, if we had O&M monies increased because of this, you could just say, we'll pitch into the road maintenance. But we do have some examples, like Golden View, only the street, not the properties next to it, is part of ARDSA. So as ARDSA members, we pay for that, and the locals don't, which is an odd thing. Road service areas are only maintenance, typically. You could be a rural road service area and do some fixing stuff. So they're not, it wasn't ever their responsibility to build these roads. An issue that is on the hillside is, we're up here, we like it, close the door. We don't want more development. And that's not everyone, maybe not all, but it's a very vocal group. So comments that we've gotten at community councils and talking to other people is, oh, you're just doing this to open up doors for development. So that would be a negative. We'll get negative votes on the hillside because of this too. But I think one aspect on that is, carefully chosen roads, and in fact, if they were just built to, I guess the phrase was here, fire apparatus standards, not collector standards or whatever would be needed to do a subdivision, that would mitigate that somewhat. And on some of these connections, I'd imagine some are quite short. A few hundred feet would connect the end of Birch Road to Diarmid. We have some, little neighborhoods like that, and they could be fire gated, but they'd be built, not paved, not to collector standards. Which was one thing in those neighborhoods would be very odd to have 100 feet of municipal standards. But that's an issue at all levels. And then I do have a question too, since Craig's here, is talk about we in the current tip, and if you come up, it's hard to hear you guys on the tape if you're not kind of up here talking. But
Sit here?
yeah, it'd be fine. Could I? Do have time here? We have Mountain Air in the tip. We have in there, we can do studies for these things. In the tip, I think, or that was just an MTP. Fred's not here. Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the long range plan.
Yes.
But any of these things to get the match, we go that way, has to go through a very complicated process.
You mean to add projects into the tip?
Right.
Yeah, so we have a ranking and scoring process that we have criteria set up that I think we have 15 or 16 of them now, and the projects, they have to higher the score on different criteria, and they can be connectivity criteria or life safety or all sorts of different things, and then they just filter up to the top, and the highest ones get added into the tip based on the funding available. So we have plans and studies in the tip. Those are more challenging to find the match for. Capital projects are easier because we can bond for those, but we can't use the bond funds for plans or studies. But yeah, we can add all those projects. They just based on how they rank and score.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
So we have a tip, presumably a 4-year tip at
Yes.
this point. So if we came up with, we have about 90 projects, I think, between all these studies, and said, okay, we're going to choose 10. How would we get those in the tip?
So there are two options right now. The current tip is from 2019 to 2022. And so we could either, you can add projects now. The way we usually do that is if you want to add a new project that we didn't rank and score previously, you would have to have staff rank and score it, and either hopefully it'll score higher than the ones that are in the current tip. You could add those in. You have to displace a project if it's in there, or you could wait until the next creation of the next tip, which would be 2023. So around 2022, we would start ranking and scoring projects, nominate all these projects, and just see how they filter out and add them in there based on the allocation as we get there.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
This question for Bill or anyone else in the admin. If we are using ARSDA money and it's an ARSDA road, are there any contract implications, union contract implications, if we try to use some kind of non-union contractor, like for snowplows, for example?
Maybe. That one caught me off guard. I'll have to get back to you on that one. I don't know the answer to this now, but maybe John Middleton does.
But it's not ARDSA money anymore. This is area-wide money.
So
That
this
might be
area-wide money is
ARDSA
gone.
thing, but we're saying if these are funded, it's an area-wide. So,
I mean, and this would all be work that has not previously been performed by any union representative, because it's not work that existed before. So I don't know, as I sit here now. I mean, we might end up having to pay David Bacon wages and that kind of thing, but I don't know as I sit here now.
Mr. Wilbur?
So when, on the bond projects, we're gonna put those out to contract to bid, but when it comes to maintenance, even in ARTSA, we hire contractors to haul snow. So for maintenance purposes, we do use contractors on roads that we built in facilities that we already made. We might plow the snow with our own folks, but when we haul the snow, we do hire contractors to do that. So I don't think that would inhibit us, but I think Mr. Palsy said is we can check it, but I don't think it's gonna inhibit us.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So it seems like we're creating a new classification. It's not an ARTSA, it's not a WRSA. It's whatever initials we put on it. And so that would just be totally new, but it'll allow us to get the funding to build these connections for public safety reasons. And so that's how we sell to the voters. Is, well, if you have a fire, I mean, you may not live on Hillside, but maybe your friends do or your relatives do, and you'd probably like to see them get out of it.
Please come up with a really catchy acronym.
Yeah.
Ms. Kennedy.
Chair. And just a couple comments, I guess. One of them is be very careful about the idea of gating off an access road, because we tried to do that in Eagle River, and the fire department promptly came out and cut the bolts and everything. Anyway, opened it up just because they don't want to have to deal with anything like that should they need to use it. So anyway. The other comment, though, is I think this also could have some positive implications for even the transportation within the Anchorage School District, because they have to have through routes. They can't back up a bus. They can't turn it around. So this could even save them some money and potentially make that bus trip a little bit easier on some of our school kids. So.
And I have one last thing. It's unfortunate Meg left out to say to her question about how did we get here. Also, I mean, I think the tough challenge is, why did we keep building? We kept building because people owned land and they had a right to build there. And to tell them, no, you absolutely can't build, because they still met fire code. I mean, fire code, you can have a secondary access road, or you can have sprinkling. Like, there's several different ways to meet the fire access code. So we don't have things that, we don't have buildings, I'm sure we do somewhere that predate the fire code, but generally people were complying with the fire code. It's just that we would have had to take a position that you can no longer build on any of this privately owned property, which we're legally allowed to do, but that means we buy the property, basically. If we take away any right to use land for any type of construction, it's a regulatory taking. So I think that people have been reluctant at some point to say, that's it, we're done, no more building. None of this land is developable, because understandably, for several policy reasons, but one of them being simply legal and monetary, we would, if people already own land, then we say you can absolutely never build anything there. All value of your land is gone. The regulatory taking.
Just cleaning up some miscellaneous pieces as we get closer to
Forrest
the end,
is not
too.
believing me.
If you build a second road, you can build there.
Right, and
But
to
you're
the
asking
extent
us
that
to build their road.
No, so you're saying okay, sorry, go on.
But to the extent that you're viewing that as us subsidizing new developments, all the current developments were equally subsidized. I mean, nobody built Tudor, nobody built Lake Otis. The state probably just gave us millions of dollars to do that, so no developer had to shoulder those kinds of costs.
And there has never been law that you had to have two roads to build. Do you understand? Like, none of these things are illegal. What you're saying is somebody 20 years ago should have passed a law and said absolutely no more building until someone builds a road. That was not the law. So we are where we are with a bunch of people who are unsafe. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Well, just to tag along with that, and I think that's exactly what happened out in Eagle River in a couple of situations with some of our developments, is they were promised to build out to a certain point, and then at that point you had to build that secondary access road. Well, in some cases, the developers switched ownership, and then it became a question of, well, who's really going to build this road? But we did have some developments that were stopped until that access road was decided on. And I think it's probably always going to be a little bit of an argument between whether the municipality has to build that road or the developer does. and that's gonna be the pushback. But I think that's, you know, that's already happening, and it has happened even, well, I know definitely 20 years ago. So anyway, it's kind of an ongoing struggle.
Okay.
Well, actually, just to follow up, and Meg's not here to hear this, but how we got here is we had like 25 consecutive years of economic growth. And so we were sitting at a 2 or 3% vacancy rate for a long, long time. And so we were needing to build housing. And so there was land available, so people were building on it. I mean, it's pretty simple. Now the economy is a little more challenging, and we have fewer lots to build on, so, you know, development is slowed down a little bit. But that's how we sort of got here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Very quick, I mean, couldn't this also have been solved if all of these had just been in the RSA? If everybody had just been in the same road service area, then our property taxes would have gone to pay everybody's roads. You're talking about we were subsidized downtown or Fairview. Well, yeah, by the state and the feds, who are very different revenue sources. But the Hillside explicitly separated themselves, not explicitly, but they kept themselves separate so they wouldn't have to pay property taxes, so they wouldn't have to those property taxes to pay for those roads in downtown.
Let's not have this debate, Mr. Weddleton.
It's not a debate, it's a statement of fact. Everyone up there pays for roads or neighborhood roads, and some, like Glen Alps, pays a higher mill rate for their roads, and I'll use it to go up to Glen Alps, than ours is rate. So there is a savings, and I think there is often an inequity there, but it's not the extreme level that people think.
All right. Seeing no further discussion, I guess if you have amendments, get them in ASAP. Otherwise, we're done. Thanks.